Chapter 8. The sun was high now, the dew gone. The stubble of weeds was prickly under my feet. I took the shortcut across Mallon's field. Sean Red and the rest of the Mallon family were outside, almost all. Liam was gone, probably fishing at the edge of the bay, but the others were in the back field. Even Granny Mallon, in an old woolen nightgown, tore up the side as she propped up against the stone wall. Mrs. Mallon, her hands on her thick hips, looked grim. She didn't answer when I called. "Bless all here." Sean raised his hand. "Someone is screaming in the next valley." I crossed my arms over my chest, beginning to shiver. "She's being taken by a she." He was trying to smile. "Pulled down under the earth." "Don't say that." "Do you think someone is screaming because of the potatoes?" he asked. I opened my mouth to tell him about Anna, but Mrs. Mallon was moving quickly down the field, her red skirt pulled up around her large legs. She knelt over one of the beds, groaning, digging at one of the plants with her hands. I followed Sean and his brother Michael to see what she was looking at. It hardly seemed like much. It was just the tiniest edge of the leaf that had shriveled and curled under, but it was enough to see that the stem underneath was soft and pulpy. "Look across," Mrs. Mallon said in her harsh voice. "There." She pointed with one thick finger. "And there." It was everywhere. A leaf lying back against the stem as it had no strength to stand up by itself. Another stem seemed to lose color in front of our eyes. I backed away, stepping on one plant, shaking the edge of my skirt where the plant had left a smear of brownish ooze. I tried not to take a deep breath because the smell was stronger now. I took another step, seeing Granny Mallon, her pipe in one hand. "Without potatoes, we'll starve to death," she said, beginning to rock back and forth. "I have to go home," I said, but no one listened. The Mallons were walking across the beds, and Mrs. Mallon began to cry with a hard, deep sound. "I'm sorry for your trouble." I bit my lip. I didn't know why I said it. It was something Da and Maggie whispered at wakes when someone had died. I picked up my skirt and ran toward home. My breath came in ragged gulps as I climbed over the stile, looking at our own potato plants. They were too close to the Mallons' field. If it had been the she with their long fingers, they could have reached across the fields and touched and turned everything black. I stopped to look at one plant, and then another. Green. Firm. Lovely. Safe? "Granda?" I called as soon as I saw our roof from the smoke drifting away from it. "Celia?" I ran down the path, ducking my head as I burst in through the open doorway. "Granda?" It was dark inside the cottage, the fire low. Celia sat on the hearth, knitting, her eyes closed, counting the pattern in her mind. "It's the potatoes," I said. "Anna's?" "No, at least not yet." I shook my head. "It's Mallon's field." Granda pulled himself to his feet. "Then ours." He limped to the doorway, pulling the spade off the hook on the wall. Celia and I followed him outside, Patch's hand in mine. We walked along between the beds just as the Mallons had done. The spade dug into the earth. We held our breath as Granda lifted up the small potatoes, then patted them under the earth again. He rubbed his hand against his sides and smiled as he saw us staring at him. But his smile was a terrible one and his eyes were wild. Celia walked ahead of us. Inside, she reached into the bin for potatoes. She had to scrape the bottom for them. The last of the old harvest was on us. I looked at Granda again. He was terrified and trying not to tell us. "We can gather limpets," I said, "and mussels on the rocks." He smiled a little. "Aye." "And Sean and I caught that wonderful fish. We could catch another." "Grand." "And we could buy bread." She held up her knitting. "I will walk to Balliol and sell my shawl. It's almost finished." She stared at me. "Lovely," I said a little grudgingly. My shawl was hanging on its bag and a hook, a shawl with a hole, a splotch of mud, knots as thick as the wild onions along the river. "And I will finish my own straight away," I told her, "and make mittens from the last of the wool." "Yes, fine," Celia said, but I knew she didn't believe it. I didn't believe it either, much less a pair of mittens. I had never once been able to do the thumb. "But remember," Celia leaned forward, "our potatoes are still healthy. Not a mark, not a spot." We all nodded, looking out the open doorway. She was right. The potatoes were still fine.